Marian Glavish, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our first back-to-school teleseminar. There are a couple of reasons for this teleseminar. One is to give something back. As you know, teachers give to give, not to get. That's what we do as teachers. And as many of you know, this is the 10th year of my Busy Educators newsletter, and I couldn't do it for this long without the support of all of you. So I thank you for your continued support. Having said that, I do have an ulterior motive. I, too, am going back to school on Tuesday. I wanted to pick your brains and find out what you're all doing to overcome the many challenges we have in the classroom. It also gives me the chance to introduce to you my two colleagues, Paul Jackson and Joe Martin. Paul and Joe provided me with incredible insights, different perspectives, and most importantly, solutions that work for teachers in today's classroom. Over the course of 2 years, we've put together what I consider one of the best audio series that deals with the complexities of teaching in the modern classroom. This 8-hour series, which can be instantly downloaded onto your hard drive or iPod, is based on questions sent to us by hundreds of teachers just like yourselves. So, over to you, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Marian and Joe, and along with myself, an opportunity just to sort of briefly introduce ourselves in terms of our educational background so that you've got a little better picture of who we are. I'll start with myself. I'm Paul Jackson. I'm a retired elementary school teacher and principal. I was principal for the last 12 years of my career. So what I bring to this occasion and what I bring to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom is an administrator's perspective. I've also focused primarily as an administrator on teacher evaluation and in particular classroom visits to collect data in the classrooms and sit down with teachers and analyze their teaching styles, etc. And then, of course, coach them to become better teachers. So I have visited an awful lot of classrooms, so I've seen an awful lot of good teachers and fully admit that I've been able to steal a multitude of great ideas, which I have then passed on to other teachers who needed assistance, and I was able to do things like arrange for teacher A to meet with teacher B and discuss a certain topic. So I bring that background to this whole Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom focus. So that's me. I'm going to turn it over to Marian, and he can give you a brief introduction and background information for him.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Marian Glavish, and I'm a full-time classroom teacher. I've been teaching now for 27 years at the elementary level, and this is my very first year teaching a split. I have a grade 5-6 split class, which, again, I've never taught, so I'm on pins and needles, and hopefully I'll get some ideas from all of you how to approach that challenge. I'm also the editor of 2 newsletters that go out once a month, the Busy Educators newsletter and How to Make a Difference. And I bring the teacher perspective to how to thrive and survive in your classroom. So, Paul, I guess over to Joe.
Yeah, Joe, how about you taking a crack at it then and give people a little bit of your background?
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Marian. My name is Joe Martin. I'm middle school as well as the high school level as well as college level. Primarily my focus has been in working with at-risk youth and those who with special needs who are, for lack of a better word, a challenge to deal with. Full-time now, I'm a speaker, author, and educational consultant. I travel across the country, probably about 75 school districts a year. I'm training and working with teachers all across this country, probably about 40,000 teachers a year, and approximately reaching about 110,000 students a year. And I'm just excited about participating in such a worthwhile event, for the fact is that we're dealing with the grassroots stuff. And I think what I bring to the table is a lot of input from a lot of different places from all across the country. I mean, I've gone all across from California to Hawaii to New York down to Florida, And just meeting so many different teachers and professionals in this field, I've learned so much. In addition to training, just learning so much on what works, what doesn't work, and some of the new things that are happening out there in the field. So hopefully I'll be able to get some insight from that area. But I'm just happy to be here to be able to give as much input as I possibly can.
Thanks, Joe. And for those of you that are listening in, all three of us are the people, the three co-authors and co-producers of How to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom. So should you decide to explore that program, you will be getting more of the same as you are tonight, which of course we hope is going to be a great value to you. The format for tonight, I have prepared a series of questions which are a compilation or came from questions submitted to Marian through his newsletter of teachers just like yourselves who are headed back to school, or in some cases are already back, perhaps in their first week or second week, depending on where you are in the country, and sort of asking them, you know, what is it that you would like to ask? What is it that's bothering you, concerning you for the upcoming year or for the rest of the year? And I took those questions and I went through them all, and I tried to put them together in some categories, and I'll explain those in a minute. And they fell into a variety of categories. And what I've done is taken those and kind of compiled them into some what I think are questions that will address most of the issues. I fully realize that some of the questions were extremely specific, and some of the questions were in a category sort of off by themselves. And so I apologize for those people. We couldn't possibly look at all of the questions since there were, so I've done the best that I can do. I'm going to be asking those questions, and for the purposes of the moderators, the co-moderators, I'll be using a number, which won't mean much to you who are listening, but it will to them, because I'm not going to be able to do all of the questions, I'm sure, in the time frame that we have. If we do, that'd be great, but I'm not so sure that we will. So I'll be giving them question numbers so that they can use their cheat sheet, if you want to call it that, and know which question I'm going to be asking, and then they've already prepared some notes for them in most cases. The general categories that kind of evolved out of your questions were special needs students, personal and professional development, school administration, classroom discipline, standardized testing, curriculum, student motivation, individualized instruction, and professional communications. Now, by and large, that's the same kind of range of topics that we cover in How to Thrive and Survive, and the same ones that were covered when people were asked to submit their questions for us to use for that presentation, so that they don't surprise me at all. I want to caution you, too, that it is nearly impossible to answer specific questions about specific students for a whole host of reasons, most of which you already know. It would be nice if we could do that. But what we will provide you with is an attitude, an approach, a philosophy, a plan, a process, something that you could use to apply to those kinds of situations. In other words, we want to provide you with a generalized approach to a specific problem. And using that generalized approach, you should be able to better analyze your particular problem and then figure out an action plan. You'll hear us refer to that a fair amount, because we really do believe, all three of us believe, that successful teachers have in the back of their minds always a plan and approach upon to solve problems in the classroom. And that it is those kinds of things that will make the difference between you having a successful school year or not a successful one, or for successfully dealing with an individual student or not succeeding with that particular student. So keep that in mind. Our job is to give you a framework within which you can attempt to solve your specific problems. And you'll see that thread running throughout. We will begin the questions, and right now we'll see how far we get during the time. I said there are many more questions here than we have time to answer. I strongly suggest to each of you that you take notes. This is going to be recorded, so you will have an opportunity to hear it again. But we, all three of us, strongly believe that by you taking notes, and for example, if you have a special needs student in your class, then and you've got that particular student in mind, then your notes are going to be a lot more personalized, and that's the way it should be. So please take notes as we're going through it. All right. The other thing that's going to happen is each of the three of us will have an opportunity to add their perspective to the questions. It may be that one of us declines because that's not an area of expertise, or they're not comfortable with that, or they just don't have anything more to contribute. But knowing all three of us, that's possible, but probably highly unlikely. What you also will get are three different approaches, which is really neat, because you will get a practicing classroom teacher's perspective, you will get a school administration's perspective, and then you will get the coach, the consultant, who works with a broad range, a really broad range. So you're going to get a whole host of different ideas. We are not going to spend a lot of time. Each of us is going to respond to the question with one or two suggestions, and I'll let you leave it up to you then to decide whether you want one, the other, all of them, compile them, whatever you want to do with them. I hope everybody understands what we're going to do. Just a reminder for those of you that are on the line, if you have background noise in your home, you can use *6 on your telephone. That will mute you out, so you will not be heard. And then you can use *7 if you wish to ask a question or make a comment later on in the program. The first 60 minutes or so, we're going to be using it for answering questions. We hope to allow 10 or 15 minutes for some questions from the listening audience, depending on how things go with the questions, and then we'll use the last 10 minutes to wrap up and to explain a little bit about how to thrive and survive in your classroom. So, gentlemen, the first question is going to be an easy one because it's number 1 on your list of questions, and one of the topics at least, that came up quite often is special needs students, and I'm talking here about special needs students of all types. It could be ESL, it could be ADD, ADHD, behavior problems, reading problems, any special needs at all. And I'm lumping all that together because the question then begs, and here is the question, how can I effectively help special needs students in my classroom? How can I effectively help special needs students in my classroom? And we're going to keep the same order, so Joe, and then Marian, and then myself, and I can then work our way on to the next question. So Joe, you get the first shot at how can I effectively help my special needs students in my classroom?
Thanks, Paul. I like the fact we're going to try to keep it brief, and I like the fact that we have three ways of looking at the same problem. My notes to myself and wanted to share with the listeners is that I say the key is think small. Think small. And what I mean by thinking small is that you want to use small 15 minutes to break everything up into blocks when you're teaching students who are special needs students. And when we say also think in small sections, that you want to focus on one idea and one objective or one measurable in a given time frame. So don't try to take on too much and try to give them too much at one time. And you don't want to overwhelm this particular student. And like we said, with these special needs, there's so many different specific problems that you can face. But I'm hoping that people get a good grasp of what I'm saying about thinking small. Another thing that I mentioned about thinking small is also celebrate the small victories. celebrate and reinforce small successes when they accomplish anything that moves them in progression of the objective that you've already set for yourself. So to me, one of the keys in dealing with special needs is to think small.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Marian.
Okay, thank you. Those are great suggestions. As a classroom teacher, I'm wondering if there is an IEP, which is an individual education plan in place. If there is, read the suggestions before you get the student. Be aware of his strengths and any weaknesses. As well, check with administration and last year's teacher to see if there was a plan in place, and just pick up from there. Another one that I'm using with a student right now that may be classified as Asperger's is keep the lines of communication open with parents. I've already met with the mother and with the student himself. And piggybacking on Joe's comment, celebrate the victories by checking in often with the student. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Marian. I took a slightly different approach to what you've previously heard, although I like what they're saying. It very much fits in with what I have to share with you. Is with any special needs student, it's important for a classroom teacher to understand that part of their job will be to bring together the people who are the stakeholders in that student's behavior, in their school progress, or whatever. In addition, it is the classroom teacher's responsibility, although you might not want to do it, to also seek out any experts that have been dealing with the child and pick their brains and get the information. So it fits in very much with what Marian has to say. So I guess my approach for any special needs students that you have in your classroom is that you do an analysis of the situation and of the student. And by doing the analysis, you do what Marian is suggesting, gather information, read what you can about the student, talk to previous teachers, etc. So you want to gather information, make your own notes so that you have your notes as to what you have learned about that particular student and about that student's problem. You then want to analyze that information and look for the positives, look for the holes, look for the things that might be a source of additional information. Look for potential team members so that you can approach this problem as a team approach, not as an isolated teacher with an isolated student. The more you get more people involved, the more comfortable you will be, and the less stressed you will be, and the more successful you will be. You then want to create an action plan of some sort. It may be a simple action plan like, I'm going to call a meeting ASAP to talk to the key stakeholders in this child's life and see if we can come to some kind of common agreement for an action plan. So you want to call the meeting. That might be part of your action plan, and out of that meeting may come another action plan. And as you can see, that fits in a lot with what Joe's talking about too, about changing one thing at a time, focusing on one thing at a time, and not trying to do all things all the time, that kind of thing. Once you've got an action plan and you put it into place, you want to then make sure that you spend some time with an analysis of the results. Is it working? Why is it working? Why isn't it working? What could be done? What things have you done? How have you tweaked it? That kind of thing. And when you do that analysis and that reflection on that, then you want to create a new action plan. And you keep creating new action plans. You keep modifying the old one, creating new ones or whatever, but you just keep going. It's like good classroom teachers have a bag of tricks that they can use in their classroom to handle a variety of situations. On any given day, one of those might work and the others may not. Well, in a similar kind of fashion with special needs students, you have to know as much as you can. You need to get all these stakeholders together. So I guess my overall philosophy is that you need to do some homework, and you got to get the team together, and you got to get a team working together. And that may mean that you can turn over some of that responsibility to some other people. like special needs teachers or the principal or vice principal or parents or whatever, but you're going to need all those people involved. And the sooner you get them involved, the easier it's going to be for you, and even better, the more successful it will be for the student. So you've got a variety of responses. That's the kind of way things are going to be going for the rest of the time. And what I'm going to do now is alert my colleagues to question number 2A. This falls under the category of personal and professional development. It was interesting. There were quite a few questions about personal and professional development, taking a variety of different approaches, and I hope we get a chance to come back to this topic with another question. But the first question that we're going to answer is question number 2A then for my colleagues. How do I balance my personal and professional lives? How do I balance my personal and professional lives? Joe.
Okay, Paul, this is actually one of my favorite questions because I get asked this quite a bit when I'm traveling from different school districts by different teachers. And what I offer is my personal advice on what I've done to kind of manage my schedule as well as helping teachers manage theirs is two simple things. One is to focus on the most important, not the most urgent. And this shouldn't be something that's foreign to the listeners right now, but the way I try to break it down is that instead of looking at all the things that we have to do in a given day, and we know there's many things we got to do, personally, I think you should try to focus on the most important 3 things per day that you can do. Some might even be 2 for some people, but for me, it's 3. Typically, I have a list of probably about 15 to 20 things I need to do every day, but there's no possible way I could finish them all. So I try to focus on the top 3 things. And they're not just the most urgent things, but they're the most important things. And an example that I would give you is, and I do this every morning, is I have what I call my quiet time. Now, it has nothing to do with my to-do list of things I have to get done in the classroom or what I have to get done when I'm training or doing any of this stuff. But my quiet time is me to get centered on where I need to be emotionally, spiritually, personally, and kind of like de-stressing myself and getting myself prepared. Now, even though that may not show up as a great accomplishment to anyone else in my classroom or anybody that I'm training, the fact is that I could not do my job effectively unless I started my day quietly. Even I'm flying back home today, I was in the airport and I made sure I found a place in the terminal that there's no one around, and I had my quiet time for 30 minutes to get me set up to do everything that I had to do today, which included a lot of things preparing for this call, picking my son up from school, responding to focus on the important, not the urgent, and just kind of focus on the top 3 things that you must do. And those other things, if they were that important, they would have made the top 3 anyway. And the second thing I would like to offer, and this is very dear to me, is that stop focusing on more to-dos and focus on more to-bes. And what I mean by that is being more than doing, is that you want to focus on becoming a better person, not just a busy one. Because I saw a lot of the questions that we had from some of the people who wrote in, and the thing was that they're stressing themselves out, not having time with their family. But also we have to understand that we can't serve others unless we preserve ourselves. So you have to take time to exercise, eat properly, relax, even though it doesn't sound like you have time in your schedule to do it, because you won't be effective unless you take care of you first. So preserve yourself so you can serve your students and your school. So that's what I suggest. Marian, what do you have to say?
I'm going to add to your private time, because I think it's really important for teachers not to feel guilty about taking some time out of the day to have that private time. And I do the same thing. I do the meditation. I have the private time with my list or just a cup of coffee, and I get to read the newspaper for 10, 15 minutes. And I think it's really, really important that you have that daily ritual. What I found that's really helped me on the long term, what I do in the classroom is basically I'm just planting and nurturing seeds for the long term. I keep reminding myself that there are things I can and I can't control. One thing I can control, which is really hard, is my reaction to an event. And since we're always constantly dealing with issues in the present, just like Joe mentioned, and sometimes we get caught up by them to the detriment of our personal lives. You have to ask yourself whether this matters in the long run. Do I want to die on this hill? It's interesting. It's interesting to note that what I thought was really important in May and June doesn't occupy my thoughts in July and August. So those are my thoughts. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, thanks, Marian. Yeah, I'm going to sort of a practical kind of approach to it in terms of balance. First of all, you have to understand the balance between your personal and your professional life is wrapped around your attitude toward it all. We live in a society, I think, sometimes where we have to be, or think we have to be martyrs. We have to be super teacher, super mom, super dad. We have to save the world. We have to get out there and do things above and beyond the call of duty all the time, every time. And you have to start to step back a little bit and say, okay, what is my attitude about my personal and my professional life? Which of those two has the most importance? There are times in your life when your professional life may indeed be the primary focus. I can think of when you're first starting out, you might be you're just, everything is, just basically you got the time and energy to devote 100% to your job. Then along comes families and things have to change, and you have to change your attitude with them. So, that's a time of the life when things are a little bit different. When your kids are young, you should have a different attitude toward the balance between your personal and professional life. As you more mature and you're getting near the end of your career, as a classroom, devote more time to the classroom and to your professional life, and less to your personal life because your family's been raised. But you have to decide. You have to put things in perspective. Now, here's an idea as a practical kind of suggestion to you, and I've done this with stress management workshops, is suggest to you that if you have a favorite quote or statement or comment that someone's made that you think is really important that you need to remember day in and day out, make a copy of it in the morning, and you're first going to see it. And you're going to put it up there, and you're going to read it. And you can change that as often as you want. You can leave one up for a week, leave it for a month, leave it forever if you want. There's so many good quotes out there that I think you can utilize to remind yourself of the kinds of things that Joe and Marian have suggested. For example, and this may be something you just write yourself. It isn't something you have to get from a book or from somebody else. For example, do as much in one day as you can reasonably do. Now, if that's on your mirror every morning, and you remind yourself of that, because that's repetition, 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 and eventually it will change your attitude, and when you change your attitude, it'll change your behavior. Or be satisfied with whatever effort you're going to give and the results that come. Or save time for yourself each day. Or think progress, not success. Mind about your balance. When you are no longer teaching, and I can speak from experience, the educational system will continue to operate without me. They won't miss me. If they do at all, it'll be for a few hours or a few days, probably at most. So do what you can while you can, but don't try to do so much that it ruins your personal life. You are expendable. You are important. You will have an impact, but don't get carried away. Put together with Marian's and Joe's, I think you could probably get an idea that in all three cases we're talking here about probably more of an attitude change than anything else.
And Paul, can I add one thing that just to kind of just reinforce what you said, because you're absolutely right. I have a statement that I have on my mirror, we never even talked about it, but when you mentioned it, I said, yeah, I use that. I have a statement that says, there's always time to do the most important thing first.
Yes.
That's all I look at, doing the most important thing first. But you're right, I read that every day.
And it's amazing, though, if you do that and you change them frequently or whenever it's most convenient for yourself, those stick with you. Those are the things that you're subconsciously reminded of constantly, so that it becomes a part of you, and therefore you can put a new one up on the mirror because you want to create a new attitude and a new behavior. So it is a very effective method of doing it. For my Co-A, this falls under the category of school administrators and school administration, not necessarily administrators. And here's the question. How do I deal with cell phones and other electronic devices in my classroom? I'd like to explain a little bit here. I chose this question not because it had cell phones and electronic devices are representative of a whole host of things that you as a classroom teacher see as a problem and would like to see changed on a broader basis, like the whole classroom and the whole school. In other words, they are issues you think that need to be dealt with. That's why I chose it as a representative. All right? So I'm going to turn it over to Joe and see how he deals with, how do I deal with cell phones and other electronic devices in my classroom?
At least what I do. That has worked well for me, and I never had any problems with it because I was very clear about on the first day to do this. One is have specific rules and guidelines for dealing with cell phones or any type of electronic devices. And when I say just have specific rules and guidelines, I mean they must be very, very clear, and you must explain it very, very thoroughly so that it's totally understood and it's totally agreed upon that these are the rules of how we deal with this situation. That there's no cell phone. Like we don't allow cell phones to go off in my class. They can't even have them on when they're in my class. But I make sure that everyone is in total agreement that they understand what the rule is. That's the second thing, and this is very key, is that you have to follow through on the consequences that are outlined in your guidelines or your class rules. So if I tell them this is going to happen if your cell phone or whatever, if you're caught listening to your iPod or something that's going to happen in class, that I must follow through on what we said because they're in total agreement. These are the consequences if you break this particular rule in class. But I think the third point that I do, I think, has probably been the biggest benefit. What I allow my class to do, and this is something kind of a little bit radical, is that I let them hold me accountable. Say, for instance, with the cell phone. I have an agreement with my class that if my cell phone ever goes off in class, if they hear my cell phone go off in class, that I will pay them $100 if they hear it. And so, now you can imagine my class just jumps for joy. Now, what they don't understand is I don't bring my cell phone to class. Okay? But they don't know that. But the thing is, I'm letting them know that I'm in this too. So if, as busy as my schedule is, and all the things I have to do, if my cell phone doesn't go off in class, what I'm implying to them is that your cell phone should never go on wood. I've never had any problems with that happening in class. But I got to believe that them holding me accountable with the $100, I think that's very effective. Mario, what do you think?
Oh, I like that one. I have used that one before as well, and it is a good one. Good one. A number of things I do because it's starting to happen at our school at the elementary level. Not so much cell phones, but the iPods and the portable digital devices such as the DS Lights. One thing is we do have a policy in place. There's a district and a school policy that gives you some support. Unfortunately, sometimes the rules aren't enforced by other teachers. So I'm always talking to the administrator and the teachers and finding out what they're doing if this is the line that we're towing. One thing I did last year, which worked out really well, to deal with the students who brought in the DS Lights. what I did was I let students use them when they earned some free time. So for about half of the day, I'd let them bring out their DS Lite, and I'd have them show me how they worked. That worked out really well because I found out that about 3/4 of the students, including boys and girls, both had the devices. And what I found out as well, since my son, my 16-year-old, also has a DS Lite, that if I brought in his DS Lite and I turned it on, I could find out if the students were using theirs underneath the desk now, and as soon as one turns on, you can pinpoint. So that kind of gave me an edge over them, and they knew that I knew stuff about it that they didn't think I knew. So it worked out well, but my concern is once these cell phones get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, what do we do? Over to you, Paul. I know you didn't have this problem, Paul.
No, I'm old. So I didn't have. I got out 10 years ago now. So yeah, I didn't have to put up with that. I'm not sure what cell phone. So I don't know whether it's because of that, but my approach to the answer to the question is going to be a more generic one, and that is that. And it's been alluded to already by Marian, is if an issue arises, like I said before, where a classroom teacher realizes that the problem is not only in her classroom but in others, either in the division or the grade level, or it's a problem that is more school-wide, then in a leadership role, start by discussing the problem or the issue with teachers, assess their support for the idea that something needs to be done. When you get some teachers in support of that, you could hold some informal kind of grade discussions. You could bring the topic up at a divisional meeting. You could bring it up at a grade meeting. If the topic has enough support, you can approach the administration, which I strongly recommend that you do. And if you can then build the team and build the commitment from individual teachers, you will never get 100% agreement. At least if you do, it would be quite a surprise. But at least you owe it not only to yourself and your students, but to the school, to take a leadership role in getting the administration and the rest of the staff to agree on things. Let's give you an example, a simple example of a problem that you may have as a classroom teacher, that kids wandering the halls during class time, sitting doing their work, and they walk by and make faces at them and disrupt the class, or they make noise in the hall, or there's too many students wandering around the hall at any one time. So let's suppose there's some misbehavior in the hallways during class time. If you can then use my approach, get some support, discuss the ideas, start a kind of a mini groundswell, get the administration on board and get everybody on board, then what Marian has mentioned about policies and plans and processes and guidelines can be made, and then you'll get more likely to get, and then that will help you also with the whole problem of enforcement. If everybody had a chance to voice their opinion and vote on the policy and accept the policy, then you're more likely to get it in place. And to add to that, then it's just like was mentioned earlier too about, make sure everybody understands, as Joe has mentioned, make sure everybody understands exactly what the policy is, why it's there, why it needed to be put in place, what the consequences are, and so on and so forth. So you can see how it all ties in, but I'm talking to you now from an administrator's point of view, that there are a lot of changes that occurred in my schools because teachers brought the issue to light with the backing of other teachers across divisions, across grades, and that is then more likely to be handled in a much better way and benefit everybody. So it doesn't matter what the problem is, if it's sufficiently bothering you enough then take that leadership role that every classroom teacher should be ready to take and lead your school to a better policy, a better plan, or whatever to solve the problems. So there you have three slightly different approaches to the same question. For the moderators, then, I'm going on to question number 4A. The general category here is classroom discipline, and this was a hard one to come up with a question that I thought kind of captured everybody's questions. There was a lot of questions about classroom discipline, of course. And so I've come up with one. I'm not entirely satisfied with it, but it's the best I could come up with. I mean, here's the question. What are some plans, processes, and procedures that I can use to establish an atmosphere of control, i.e. discipline, in the classroom? Now, you've already guessed from the question that I've presupposed that plans, processes, and procedures are key to the discipline, but we're going to expand on that too. So what are some plans, processes, and procedures that I can use to establish an atmosphere of control, quotation marks, i.e. discipline, in the classroom? Joe, you're going to be the lucky one to start it again.
Okay, and this is actually right down my wheelhouse right here. This is something I deal with quite a bit, and I do a lot of workshops on this particular thing of classroom management and taking control of your classroom. Simple philosophy on this. I got simple philosophy. There's two things you have to do. One is you have to set clear boundaries. To me, the first day of class is the most critical into handling classroom discipline. First of all, there's a question that every student, I don't care if it's elementary or high school, up to high school, that every student is thinking when it comes to classroom discipline. And the question is, do you mean what you say? Tone. So you have to set clear boundaries. And my rules for setting clear boundaries that, one, it has to be concise. We're talking about your policies and procedures, or how you handle classroom discipline. It has to be very clear. And also you have to give it confidently, as if that this is something that you expect, not something that you're hoping is going to happen, but something that you know is going to happen. And I'll give you a specific example of what I do that I live and die by. It's my classroom philosophy. Even though we have our specific rules about how I handle assignments, I don't accept late assignments, about how many errors they're allowed to make when they're doing writing assignments. I'm talking more about the teaching philosophy and what I expect from them and what they can expect from me, which goes to classroom discipline. And I'll just mention some of the things that I talk about with my class philosophy. That, one, I expect them to live up to their potential, not their problems. So I'm letting them know right now that we don't allow whiners in our class when it comes to dealing with a lot of issues, that we expect you to live up to your potential, not your problems. Yes, you can tell us what your problem is, but we're going to focus on a solution. Also, I let them know that I follow rules down to the letter. No exceptions. If it's indicated, this is what is expected of you. Also, I make it clear to my students that I expect them to respect themselves, others, as well as me in the classroom. And I even define what respect is. And here's something I also tell them, again, of anticipating problems possibly coming up. I let them know that I can't stand lazy students. Okay? And so if they have a problem with being not motivated, which kind of leads to a lot of discipline problems, I let them know how I deal with students who are not motivated. Also communicate to them that I will do whatever it takes to help them succeed, as long as it's legal. Okay, I will do whatever I can to help them succeed in the classroom. That I love students who accept responsibility for their actions. Again, I'm just setting the tone of what I expect from when it comes to behavior. Also, I let them know is that when I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it in class and ask for their forgiveness publicly. And so just getting them prepared for it. So I'm very concise, I'm clear, and I'm confident in how I communicate it. But the second part is probably the most critical part, which is I make sure that I follow through.
Right.
I don't care what it takes. I am going to follow through on what I say is going to happen if you do X, Y, Z. And I would do whatever it takes to prove that point. Now, the key to, I think, of classroom discipline is that it's not exactly just you following through. It's the first student who breaks a rule, who goes against class policies or procedures. It's how you deal with that particular student that's going to set the tone for the entire class. And so when I'm doing workshops, I've actually told teachers, I said, this doesn't sound good, but it's the truth, is that you have to, the punishment shouldn't even fit the crime with the first student. You have to go overboard in the punishment, that first student. I said, I know that doesn't sound pretty, but really what you're trying to do is get the attention of all the other students who are watching this first student who would kind of test the boundaries and step across the line. I know they're going to get the hammer, but what I've tried to do to alleviate that problem is I always share a story with my students about a student who's already broken the rules from a former class and how I handled that situation. And I always tell the same story, and it's about when I taught first graders, and when they had, they were promised they would get popsicles at recess if their name didn't go on the board for bad behavior. Unfortunately, their names went on the board, and it was time to go out for recess, and all the kids in the classroom received a popsicle except for these two kids. And both of them, as a little boy and little girl, both 7 years old, and I came to, and I went through the little spiel of why they were being punished, how come they didn't get a popsicle, did they learn their lesson, and of course they said, yes, Mr. Martin, we learned our lesson, we know not to do it again, we're going to listen to you. And I said, great, now go ahead and play, and I did not give them their popsicles. Now, do you understand that those kids were very disappointed, and they were sad, they were even crying afterwards. But do you realize that every other kid who was on that playground who had a popsicle made sure their name didn't go on the board when we were in class the next time? And obviously the two kids learned their lessons, so their names didn't go on the board the next time. And so I tell that story to my class, the current class, to let them know, if I would do that to some cute 7-year-olds, what would I do to your ugly butts when you break my rules this year? So the key is setting clear boundaries and following through to the letter exactly what you say you're going to do, and so everyone can see it. And I guarantee you, if you keep your word, you'll maintain control of your classroom. Paul, Marian, what about you?
Oh, that was great, Joe. I just have a couple of points to add. One is, have rules that you can live with.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got rules that you can't live with, you won't be able to enforce them. So again, taking a page from Joe, enforce your rules, but you got to be able to enforce them consistently. One thing I do is I keep rules to a minimum. I recommend 6, and the standard that I've used over and over again is, be in an assigned seat, ready to work. Bring all equipment and assignments. Keep your hands, feet, books, and objects to yourself. Use appropriate language. Follow teacher's instructions. No food or gum in the classroom. And those are 6 rules that are simple to state and simple to explain. And then what I do is what Joe does as well. Then I get into a philosophy. One thing I found as well, and unfortunately I've been guilty of this, is you can't assume that they know the proper behavior. Modeling what you expect out of them, and then reinforcing it. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, boy, excellent input here. Yeah, part of what I want to share has been covered. I really believe in the same thing, the philosophy. One of my philosophies, and I applied it to the whole school as well as when I had the opportunity as well as to the classroom, was choices, responsibility, consequences. So we would discuss how you make choices, how you make good choices, what it's all about, etc. That you are making choices all the time, and that you're responsible for whatever choices you make. And even if you make and choose to do absolutely nothing, you've still made a choice. And the consequences of all of your series of choices is indeed either a positive consequence or a negative consequence. And regardless of which one it is, you're responsible. Too often students don't see the fact that they made good choices as having any consequences. They say, well, he got punished because he did something wrong, but I didn't get rewarded, and so we have to talk about that yes, indeed, sometimes the reward is that you stayed out of trouble. The reward is you didn't have to stay after school, that you got to go on the field trip. So we have to discuss that. So the whole choices, responsibility, consequences theme was indeed my philosophy, if you want to call it that, for discipline. if you're going to do that, then you've got to map it out, you've got to write it out for yourself, and then you've got to share it with your class at whatever grade level they happen to be. And I had that philosophy in a whole school. I used to go around at the beginning of every school year and talk about that. But obviously, for the kindergarten kids and for the primary kids, then I had to explain it to them differently than I would to grade 7 and 8s. But everybody heard my explanation of choices, responsibility, consequence. And that fits in very well with what Marian and Joe are trying to get across in this session, and as well as Thrive and Survive, is that if you have those frameworks within which you work and you're comfortable, it's much, much easier to control, to have good discipline, because eventually, even if they don't buy into it, they at least understand where you're coming from, that you're genuine. So when you're talking about choices, responsibility, consequences, I think, too, for me at least, the disciplining when you have to have a consequence, which we'll call, say, a negative consequence, and the positive consequence might be simply you did a really good job, but the negative consequence, make sure that you have, that you leave yourself open to have a variety of options that you can use based on the circumstances for it. I don't like hard and fast consequences. You do this, this happens. I much prefer to discuss it, to gather information, to do an assessment, to take into consideration the student's past behavior. It's the same things that the courts do, okay? And I'm not suggesting that you make a court out of it, but at least students should have the options to explain themselves, to make their excuses, if you want to call them that. You don't have to accept them, but at least be given the opportunity. And what you will find eventually is that the students will again adopt and adapt to the teacher's philosophy of handling discipline. And again, it comes back to what's been mentioned many times, provided you share that with the students. Don't leave them in the dark, don't leave them guessing, and be consistent. The other thing I would talk about in terms of curriculum is that students are less likely to be a discipline problem when the school work is planned, as Joe mentioned earlier, in small chunks, and that they are kept working constantly. It doesn't mean that you're a slave driver, but you should have more than enough work for everybody to be working and to be kept busy. And I don't mean busy work, but I mean real, genuine work. If you've got your preparation done, I've seen many teachers in the classroom who run into discipline problems when they are ill-prepared for the 45-minute lesson, or the 45-minute time slot works out to a 25-minute lesson, and then you can just see it. There's kind of that dead time. So be prepared to keep students working and engaged and so on all the time that they're in the classroom. Busy hands don't get into trouble as much as the idle ones, as we all know. So there's sort of my take on discipline in terms of classroom discipline, classroom management, whatever way you want to. Got some good ideas from all of those things that we've shared. For my moderators then, we're going to go on to 5A, question 5A. And we're rapidly using up our time here, so we may go on for a few more minutes. We're not going to get to all the questions, that's for absolute certainty, but hopefully we'll get to enough that the audience will indeed be satisfied with what's going on. Category, standardized testing, and I've taken this in kind of a general kind of view. As a classroom teacher, I feel guilty and responsible for students who can't measure up to standardized tests, and that can be in a whole variety of different areas. There isn't hardly a jurisdiction in North America anymore that doesn't have some kind of standardized testing or testing done. So, as a classroom teacher, I feel guilty and responsible for students who can't measure up to standardized tests. The question then, how might I approach this problem? Joe.
Okay, let me jump in there. As far as, it's more of a philosophy, because this is really a touchy subject, and I know for a lot of teachers, that's why I'm not even surprised that it came up as a question. My philosophy on this is that I really feel for students who have to go through standardized testing, because I was one of those children who did not do well on standardized tests, and because of that I was labeled. So this is kind of like a personal thing with me, and I have somewhat of a little chip on my shoulder as a result of it. But I have a lot of empathy for students who may struggle, and I know that every student learns at a different level. So my philosophy in attacking this particular issue is that my job, I feel, for my students as the person who's responsible for their well-being, is to diffuse the test and also relieve their stress when it comes to this test. Now, I understand we get a lot of pressure put on us by the administration, by the district to perform, but I also know that I must do the right thing while I'm in the classroom as well, as far as for my students. So when I say diffuse the test, some of the things that I do is, one, I try to instill confidence in my students by assuring them of their value, and de-emphasizing the test and putting the value on them as an individual. I let them know that I believe in them, and I want them to believe in themselves. But more than that, one of the things I focus on is that I try to reassure them that I love them. And I know that may be kind of touchy-feely for a lot of people, but to me, truly, and that my love for them is not based on how they perform, but on who they are. And so, and I want to share something that with you that I do with my class. Right before they have to take a test, I give them a copy of a poem that I wrote, and to let them know, after I share with them that I care about them and it's not about their performance, I back it up. I give them a poem that I wrote that I want them to read whenever they feel they're getting stressed out over a test. I've even given it to my own son, and it's called "That I'm Not a Test Score." And it says, "I'm not a test score, an average, a calculation, or percentile, nor a school's grade or security blanket, because my mama said I'm God's child. I'm a living, breathing, walking miracle, and sometimes, yes, a little easy to ignore. But one thing I do know for sure, I'm not just a test score. See, I'm not a basic skill to be measured, standardized, or compared to on a chart. I possess the promise of what's possible, and I'm a priceless work of art. I'll admit I can be spoiled at times, always asking for and expecting more. But you told me that if I believe it, I can achieve it. So there's no way I can be a test score. So don't analyze or judge me, because like you, I smile too when I see the sun. And like you, my soul longs to be embraced and to be respected by everyone. I know I may talk too much and get on your last nerve, because sometimes school can feel like a chore. But what else would you expect from me when all you do is treat me like a test score? So I will tell you today, tomorrow, and each day until the end of the year. Go ahead, test me, grade me, and score me, but I won't allow you to reduce me to tears. See, I'm going to love myself and see myself through God's eyes, not yours. Because in the end, what you think of me is none of my business, because I know I'm more than a test score." So I don't just back it up I don't just tell them this. I back it up with my actions and let them know that I'm rooting for you, not the test. And whatever you do on this test is going to be okay. I'm still going to love you regardless of whatever happens to me as a result of you not doing well on the test. My key is to get them to do the best and de-emphasize the importance of the test and stress the importance of their own personal value, if that makes sense.
Excellent. Marian.
Well, you're a tough act to follow here, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think I want to follow him. I'm gonna put you in the middle, and then I'll come up at the end. How's that?
Oh, well, a couple things to add. I'm in the same boat as the teachers out there. In our school system, standardized tests are held for grades 3, 6, and 9. And because I teach grade 6, I'm the teacher that does the standardized test for that year. A lot of the pressure is taken off those teachers by the philosophy that the whole staff, the whole school, is responsible for the students' achievements, not just those teachers of those standardized testing years. And that does help. The responsibility is shared by all of us, not just those teachers in grade 3, 6, and 9. One thing I'll be doing as soon as the test scores come out, because this is the first year that I've taught grade 6 since we started standardizing these test scores, is I'm going to sit down with the administration and support staff and going to analyze the scores and see what improvements I can make to help those kids. That's all I've got, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, as a school administrator, I have had many, many, many teachers in my office physically upset about standardized testing and what it could do or should do or might do to students, what it's doing to them, pressures that they're going to feel. I think my best advice to all classroom teachers is that use your best professional judgment about how you deal with these students individually. And you do not need to apologize for whatever it is you discuss with them, however it is you approach the subject with them, whatever. You can advocate for your students individually. You can advocate for them with the school, with the ministry, whatever it is. Tell them like it is. Tell them what it's all about. Tell them what the purpose of the test is. Tell them who's authorized the testing. Tell them that it has no effect on their grade in that particular school grade, so that your marks at the end of the year in the report card are not going to be affected, and hopefully they aren't. I hope there's no jurisdiction. Encourage improvement. Talk to them about how they've improved, not worrying about reaching certain goals or passing or whatever. Tell them this is not a life or death situation, that when the testing is all over, things will return to normal. They don't lose any sleep over it. And the bottom message is for classroom teachers is that regardless of how the student does, it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. Like Marian said, the responsibility is shared by a whole host of people, not the least of which are people who are even outside of the system itself. Mm-hmm. So not an easy thing to deal with, and I know in some jurisdictions funding is based on that. You can't do anything about that. All you can do, no matter what grade you're in, is get the student to move from where they are ahead, to get them to progress. You cannot get them to any specific point ahead of them at any specific time. It is not possible, and it is totally unreasonable to expect that. So remind yourself of that and do what you can. And if your students in your classroom who aren't going to measure up, and you know they are not, if they come through that testing and they're not upset, they're not unhappy, that they've handled it really well, you have won. That's my advice. Take it for what it's worth. Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to have time, I think, for probably just one more question, and then we'll do, we're running into the question and answer time, but I think what I'd like to do is maybe do one or two more quick questions if we can get them in, and then we'll turn it over to wrap it up. And although there are people that want questions, if you've got questions that have arisen, please send them to Marian, and we can maybe find a way to address some of those in his newsletters or on future programs like this, because we probably will be running similar kinds of programs later on in the year, and we may be able then to discuss them. And in some situations, we may be able even to address the question more specifically, as long as we don't get overwhelmed with too many of them. So I'm going to move to question number 7A for Joe, Marian, and myself. 7A under student motivation, a topic that came up very, very frequently. How can I motivate my students to work harder, take an interest, listen to me, and work together? You can see how I've brought all those kind of issues in together. How can I motivate my students to work harder, take an interest, listen to me, and to work together? Joe? Easy question, right?
This is another one I get asked a lot. I'm going to cover two quick things. but both are vitally important, I believe. One is, I think this is something that we don't do enough of as educators, because it's a different paradigm. I believe we need to sell what we're teaching. I came from a corporate background before I went into education, so I only know one thing, that's how to make someone want what you have. And so I never take for granted that when I'm teaching anything, whatever the subject may be, that my students want to learn it. I assume they don't want to learn it. And so I have to make my case as if I'm a lawyer in a court of why I believe this is so important and vital for you to understand. And so now I'll admit that it's a little bit easier for me when I was teaching writing skills, because with writing, if you're a good writer, there's a lot of things you can accomplish, a lot of things you can do. But what my advice would be to teachers out there is that when you're selling your subject, keep these things in mind. And and they should be easy to remember, because I put it through an alliteration of F's. And friends, family, free time, and even a little bit of fear. And I'm going to repeat that again. These are what I know that children respond to and that kids respond to. They respond to anything that's going to be fun, anything that allows them to build more friendships, that will bring them closer to their family, give them free time. And I throw the last one in there, the fear factor, is because sometimes people do more to avoid pain than they would to gain pleasure. Now, out of all those F's, there's one F that I left out of there, and I did it intentionally, and that F is the future. A lot of times I think we make a mistake as teachers, and we try to sell kids on the future, like how great an education is for your future, and that's great if you're talking to adults. But as you know, if you work with kids for any length of time, they can't even think past next week, let alone when they graduate from high school. And so I tend to avoid talking about the future. I start in incremental steps, and I work with the things that are definitely relevant to what they're experiencing right now. That's why I cover fun, friendships, family, and free time, and even I throw fear into that. So first thing I would do is sell your subject if you want to motivate a student. The second thing is just as important. Learn what motivates them, and then use that against them. And I'll explain what I mean by that. One of the things I do on the first day of class, I tell you the first day is critical. Now, prior to the first day of class, I want to do whatever I can to learn about the students. I may try to, talk to other teachers who've had that kid before, that kind of thing. If I can meet with the parents prior to the student coming to my class, that's great too. But one of the things I do on the first day, I have a student profile sheet that's very simple, and I've used it at all levels, so they can work on any level, as long as you use simple language. And I ask students 4 questions. One, what do you like most about school? And any child can answer that question for you. What do you like most about school? It could be lunch, but they want to know what they like most about school. 2, I want to know what they hate most about school. And trust me, every student hates something about school. Number 3, I want to know what excites them when they're not in school. Whatever that may be, it could be drawing, it could be music, it could be sports, it could be anything that they like doing when they're not in class. And the 4th thing I want to know is, how do they learn best? Do they like hearing it? Do they like doing it? Do they like seeing it? In other words, I want to know their learning style. So I don't tell them kinesthetic and auditory and that kind of thing, visual. I want to know from them, would you rather hear about it, would you rather do it, and would you rather see it? Now, once I get this information, what they like, what they hate, what they get excited about, knowing their learning style, what I try to do is when I'm doing my lesson planning, I try these things will overlap because they kind of like some of the same things. But at the same time, if I know that I'm not reaching Marian in my class, I know from his profile sheet what his hot buttons are. I know that Marian loves music, so I may use an example that brings Marian to it by mentioning music. And I say, Marian, so like when you say you like music, and it personalizes the lesson or the lecture that I'm giving or what we're talking about, and it draws the student in. And I will add 2 other things that I do, which is not about the profile, but it's something that I'm just curious about. I always have my students, because I taught writing in English, that I always wanted to find out about their favorite teacher, and I wanted them to write a paragraph on who was their favorite teacher in school and why. And number 2, write a paragraph on their worst teacher in school and why. And I can't tell you how much good information you'll get when you ask those questions. One, not only do I find out what level their writing skills are at, so I know what I need to do and what kind of student I'm working with. At the same time, I know what they did like about a teacher, and I know I can incorporate those things into my class, but I also know what turned them off to learning with the teacher they did not like. So that helps me understand my students a lot better. So if I know my, quote, customer, I know what sells them, I know what they like, and then I can give it to them, if that makes sense. Martin, what about you?
Oh, I like those. I like your profile sheet. I use the same questions. I add a couple more. One is, who is the most important adult in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me an idea of who I can contact for more information about the child. I really like your writing of a paragraph on the worst teacher that you've had and the best teacher. I think I'm going to use that on Tuesday. One thing I'd like to do is, as Joe mentioned, make connections every day with students. Find out what interests them. As soon as you find out what they're interested in, then you can start gathering reading material, novels, magazines around those interests. Praise students. That works quite well when you send positive notes home in their planners. And one thing that I found that really works well is first day back, the first week, call up those parents with some positive news about the students. And one thing I find really hard, but you have to do it, you have to keep up your enthusiasm. You got to wipe that slate clean every day, and you have to keep looking for positives. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, very, very good. Short and to the point here. Treat all students with respect. If you respect them, they will respect you. Keep in mind, as a classroom teacher, the only reason that those students are behaving and doing what you want them to do is because they have enough respect for you to do it. You can't force them. You can't make them. It just doesn't work. It doesn't mean you have to be palsy-walsy. It doesn't mean that they have to love you, but they have to respect you, and you have to earn their respect. So learn to work with students, and they will work with you. Think of yourself as a classroom teacher to be their leader, not just their teacher, but their leader. Take advantage of the leadership abilities of the students in your classroom, those that are good leaders and good role models, and use them without embarrassing them to help the others. All right? Stress, progress, and continuous improvement. Always be looking at that as opposed to some arbitrary, well, you're going to shoot for an A or B or C. No, last time you got this, let's see if we can do just a little bit better. One of the little techniques I used to use with that was student would bring me their work before they were going to turn it in, and they would bring it to me, and I'd take a quick look at it, and this was an optional thing they could do, and I would say to them, look, if you go back and do just this, this, and this, you're going to get, your project's going to probably move up a grade or a grade and a half. So then they would have a choice whether they went back and did it or not. If they did it, then I made sure that they were rewarded. That kind of incentive, little carrots to dangle in front of them. Nothing wrong with that, nothing whatsoever. I think you too have to expect different things from different students, and you have to be honest with them with regard to their abilities and what's from them that you do from everybody else. That the best student in the class isn't the expectations you're having for everybody, but you are expecting students to do the best that they can do and to move a little bit beyond where they were last time, a little bit beyond where they actually are. So success breeds success kind of a philosophy. And the last piece of advice about motivating students is that you will not always succeed, and it would be nice if you could, but you probably won't. Another philosophy I have is on those days when you have a student who, for whatever reasons, their life is just peachy-dandy that day, they are motivated, they're happy, it might be their birthday, it might be a big event, whatever reason, they come to school with a different attitude, milk it for all it's worth. Take advantage of those days, because the days when they are coming to school, they probably haven't had any food, things have not been good at home, and you're going to get nothing out of them all day. You'd be quite happy for them just to sit there, because if not, they're going to cause problems. So take advantage of the good days and milk it for all it's worth, and find a way to survive the bad days and to acknowledge that the student's having a bad day or a rough day, and ask for their help. And you can only get that help if you deal with them in a respectful manner, and they will only do for you those things they want to do if they have respect for you. Those are my kind of words of wisdom. We've probably gone through only about half of the questions, which is kind of neat in some respects. Hopefully you've got some detailed answers to a lot of the general questions. I wish I could have gotten to all of them, but that's just not going to be the case. And but we do have material for another teleseminar, that's for sure, because we've still got a lot of questions to respond to. And I hope that Joe and Marian and myself have enlightened you, gave you some food for thought, gave you some ideas, put a little pep in your step for tomorrow, giving you a chance to stop and reflect on your own situation, and most importantly, giving you some strategies and some approaches that you can make use of in your classroom tomorrow or down the road when school opens. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marian, who is going to explain a little bit about our full-fledged program that we have available to you by the same three jovial presenters today. And then I'm going to let Joe sign off at the very end, and we'll target to be off the line at about 10 o'clock or slightly before. Marian.
Paul, do you think we have any time to take questions and comments at this time?
Well,
I know we're running.
I know. I would love to be able to take questions. I'm not sure how we can do that in that short space of time, but if you'd like to try, I guess we could. But
are there any questions?
I think you guys did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so too, and I especially like the part about the staff development and the motivation and the discipline. I really like the part about the discipline. I really like that. I mean, that was really fantastic.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Anybody else with a question or a comment?
Oh, something else I want to add too, excuse me. The part about motivation, I guess some of you were trying to get in, I guess, what's called intrinsic motivation, because I remember the classes that I took, a lot of them were trying to teach teachers not to use external, but to use intrinsic. And while that's good, I guess it depends on what grade level, too, that you want to use that on, too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Oh, I had a question about the, when Joe was talking about selling your subject and using the 5 Fs, and I lost, my phone went bad, and so I called back, but I missed what the point of that, not the point, but, the final part of that was after he listed the 5 Fs.
Oh, well, it's the questions, that's what you're referring to that I asked as far as the profile, or are you talking about?
Well, not the profile.
Oh, when you're selling the F.
Yeah, how do you use the fun, the friends, and stuff to sell your subject?
Like a good example of this is when I'm trying to teach and why they have, why there's so many rules when it comes to writing. And so what I try to tie them is let them know how if they. I'll give an example. When I talk about writing, I say how many of you would like to be able to convince your parents to be able to do more things and then put less rules on you. And so of course they'll raise their hand. And I say, well, if you can write effectively and explain your case in writing, you may have a better chance of persuading your parents to let you do some of the things you want to do. So again, that goes back to their free time, to their fun, spending time with their friends, that kind of thing. So what I'm saying is that whenever you come up with your subject matter, if you can tie it into something that they care about, which is fun, friends, free time, family, and something that they're afraid of, you have a better chance of selling them on your subject and getting them more involved in it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just giving you those F's as a way, as a guideline. Say, okay, what can I tie this to? Try to tie your your subject matter to one of those Fs. You don't have to do all of the Fs, but one of those things that they're concerned about, because that's what most students tell me that they want to know. How is it going to give me more free time or fun? And so you approach it from that way.
Okay.
Very good question. Anybody else? Question or comment?
I have a comment about, I think I forgot who said it, about option for punishment. I think it was Joe.
Yeah, it was me. About choices for punishment.
About explaining. You didn't like hard punishment. You just like to give them, let them explain themselves.
Right.
I like that. I kind of like that, because then you put the focus on the student. The student has a chance to think about what he or she did, if he has to explain why they did it.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Yeah, and I think, too, it humanizes the process, because it gives them an opportunity to be heard, to be treated with some kind of respect, even though the evidence might be hard and fast against them. And what I found over time was that when you talk to students about choices, responsibility, consequences, then when they used to come into my office as the principal and I would get these kids coming in, they would come in, they'd be sent in by the teacher on yard duty, and I had students come in to me and say, Mr. J, I made a bad choice.
Okay.
I shouldn't have done it. I could have done this, I could have done that, but I didn't. I pushed the kid down, I got mad at him, and I threw a snowball and rubbed his face. And I said, okay, anything else you need to tell me? So I don't have to go in and talk to the kid or anything like that. You're telling me straight up what's happened? Yeah, okay. So then I'll say to something like, okay, then I'm going to have to decide what happens as a result of that. And the kid will say, eventually when they get used to the process, they'll say, yeah, I know, and I'll pull out, I had cards for I call them discipline cards. There's more explanation in the Thrive and Survive. It's a real detailed explanation of it. But I would have the dates of every student as the principal. I'd pull those cards out and I'd say things like, well, it might be, hey, you haven't had a problem like this ever. This is your first time. So the consequences are going to be affected by that, all right? Or I might say, you had this problem earlier in the year, about 3 months ago you had this problem, twice in 1 week, but you've been 3 months now, and you've been able to keep your nose clean and not get into this kind of problem. So I respect that you've made an effort to clean your act up. So that will affect the consequences. Or I might say, look, this is the third time you've been here in 10 days. For the same thing or something very similar. So you're not learning your lesson. So what that does puts the pressure back on the student. His own behavior helps determine the consequences. That's why I don't like hard and fast. You do something, here's what happens. Well, life isn't like that, I don't think. So, yeah, that's a point that you're making, and it's a point I'm just sort of reiterating. I think anybody who has to mete out consequences, negative consequences, I try not to call them punishments, negative consequences. Anybody who has to mete those out should have the flexibility, based on the circumstances, to have a wide range of options. So I may say, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen.
Right.
Right? Or I'm going to say, this is going to happen. That's it. That's all for now. That kind of thing. So that's why I like having choice right, that there's a whole list of possible consequences, and the person in charge, in this case me, the principal, or the classroom teacher, can choose among those. That works for your kids at home too, by the way. If you're going to be out late and you break curfew, here is a list of cooperatively drawn up list of possible consequences for you breaking curfew. And I can choose 1, 2, 5, or all, because I'm the parent. But I'll do it after we've talked. And I'll do it based on your track record. So, yeah, there's a whole host of things like that, and that's all covered quite extensively in one of the sections in the Thrive and Survive. Okay. So if you want more details about that,
okay,
it's in the package.
Okay.
There you go. There's my sales pitch. Okay. Very good. Thanks for your comment, though.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Marian?
Yes, I'm here.
It's yours. Give them a sales pitch. How's that for an introduction?
Well, thank you very much, Paul. First of all, let me thank all of you for spending your precious time with Paul, Joe, and myself. I now feel more motivated and enthusiastic for that first day of school on Tuesday. Thank you. I also want to thank Paul Jackson, who, although retired from education, is still motivated to help teachers, and Joe Martin, a nationally known speaker and educational consultant, for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with us tonight. Thank you. Of course, to help you, your staff, and administration create an ideal classroom, motivate your students and yourself without burning out, I encourage you to take a look at our How to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom digital recordings. Just surf over to www.thebusyeducator.com website and follow the links to How to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom. We've put together 8 hours of instantly downloadable recordings, a 176-page handout that will give you strategies on how to find enough time in the day to teach and still have time for yourself, learn how to organize activities to keep your students busy and challenged, find out how to get students to stop talking, the right way of communicating with difficult parents, getting through to students who have low self-esteem, and much more. We've based the entire How to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom audio series on hundreds of questions from teachers that gave us their most challenging problem in teaching. So, for more information, again, just go to www.thebusyeducator.com and follow the links to How to Thrive and Survive in Your Classroom. Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay. Joe, parting remarks.
Well, I would like to just say, I mean, what you guys are doing and what we're putting together, I think is truly is a remarkable thing because I believe it can benefit a lot of people. I know we didn't get to all the questions. I can't believe we covered so much even in that period of time as much as we did. But there's one thing I would like to say, and this can cover a lot of issues, a lot of questions that we weren't able to address. I've been getting this quite a bit as I've been traveling. There's a lot of changes have been made in the system, into curriculum, and all these kind of things, and teachers don't know how to respond to it, and it's causing a lot of stress for teachers. So this is something I want the listeners and the teachers out there to really pay attention to when it comes to dealing with change. And whenever it comes to change, anything that has to happen, we have choices in how we can respond to the change. One, either we can change it back to what it used to be, which most of the time is not realistic because we had no say-so in the change because it's probably pushed upon us. The next choice we have, we can just quit and give up and just say, I'm leaving the change behind and move on to something else. And most of us don't want to do that option. And this is the key, I think, to surviving and thriving in the classroom, that whenever it's something that you cannot change, then simply change your attitude about that thing, if that makes any sense. If I can't change it, I must change my attitude about it. And so I think that instead of teachers getting stressed out about some of the things that they had no input in, which I think is unfair to a lot of us, but we still have a choice, and that's how we choose to respond to the change that comes through our system. So please make sure that your attitude towards the change does not negatively impact your students in the classroom and your colleagues as well, because we're all in this together. But I thank you guys for letting me participate on this as well.
Okay. With that, each of us are thankful for you taking your time to spend an hour and a half with us. And our hope is that you have benefited. And from the sound of the comments that the people on the call have made, that's indeed been the case. I used to think when we went to professional development activities that if I walked away from any professional development activity with just one good idea that I was able to implement successfully in my classroom, in my school, in my personal life, then that professional development was worth it. I congratulate you all for spending an hour and a half of good, solid professional development time to make yourself a better teacher. So congratulations to all of you, and best of luck in the upcoming school year. Truly. Have a good one. So on behalf of Paul, good night. Joe?
Good night.
Night. Marian?
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.